At this point we have our outline created and we want to get into our introduction in the actual paper. This is a template I've created for you on Edmodo. What this template is, it's fill in the boxes, so if I click and type here, my name appears, and then it is no longer a text box, it's part of the original document. This is formatted to MLA style, it's size 12 times New Roman. It works in this way that if you fill out the boxes, you have a properly formatted essay. Now do spot checks at the end, but it should work out for you. Okay, so you want to fill in the date here, this will be a sample date, but you want to put the number, the month, and the year. Paper title, you do want to put a title in for this, but for right now we're not going to worry about that too much because it's a decision you can make towards the end of your essay. What we want to work with is the introduction. Now in our introduction, it's really important we find a way interesting to introduce our material. If a reader's going to go through 5 pages of text, they probably want to be grabbed by the information at the beginning. So we need to find a way to introduce the material that's going to have an attention getter. Maybe we'll get background information, maybe an example situation, maybe a quote from a famous person, maybe there is an appropriate joke, but be aware, with formal writing, you don't want to aim for entertainment so much as grabbing interest or setting the tone in a more formal way or giving background information. Once we've found some way to introduce the material or grab the reader's attention, we really want to work on our thesis. Now, the thesis is going to be the single most important sentence in your paper, and it does need to be one sentence. Your thesis generally, and this is a staple way to do it, but in advanced writing it might be a little cliche, so be careful with this advice. But a staple way to do it is that your thesis should include your subject, your stance, and some main reasons for your argument. So if I were talking about adoption and whether single parents should be allowed to adopt, that would be my subject. If I were to include my stance, I would answer that question. I would say something like single parents should be able to adopt, or single parents should not be able to adopt. And then I might give an introduction or brief overview of some of my main reasons why. So single parents should be able to adopt because even some single people are perfectly capable of raising a child. They have enough money and they should be able to share the love in their life with or without a spouse. Okay, so that would set up a traditional thesis. It would be called a three-pronged thesis, and you might have teachers later on in your career that would not want a three-pronged thesis. But for a junior level research paper, it is something that'll work. It'll guide your paper. It is a strong method of organization. And usually your thesis will come as the last sentence of your first paragraph. If we set it up so we introduce our material, give some background information, put our thesis in as the first sentence to the last paragraph, I have strong ethos because I'm building traditional organization and it seems as if my paper will flow in a way that the reader can comprehend. Working with some sample thesis statements, these two here offer the subject, either illegal immigration or exploring space, and the stance, that illegal immigration is not harming America or that exploring space is essential to scientific progress. Okay, so these both include the subject and the stance, and then you can see that there are multiple reasons why the said position would be given. Now these reasons would also appear as the main arguments and would probably follow in about the same sequence in the thesis as they are overall organized in the essay. This page is examples of what not to do in a thesis. The first example, competitive sports are unhealthy because they are bad, has vague language. Unhealthy and bad aren't very specific. Those word choices don't tell us in what ways they're bad. I don't know what to expect in this essay, except the general idea that they're bad. This wouldn't build ethos very well, as I wouldn't trust the author to give me an educated argument because they've already made what seem to be simple judgments. The second example starts off with the word it. Ambiguous pronoun use really isn't something you want to do in your thesis statement. Your thesis statement should have clear, specific nouns that refer exactly to what it is that you would be arguing. So avoid pronouns at least at the beginning of your thesis and probably throughout it. The third example uses the word dumb and an exclamation point. This thesis, although it might reveal the author's opinion, really also reveals bias and would create a hostile audience. That's something we want to avoid. The last example uses the phrase, "I think." In a persuasive research paper, I know most of what's presented is what you think. It's not necessary to tell the audience that you think, you feel, or you believe. Leave that part out. You don't need self-reference in a thesis statement. If you notice on your rubric, your thesis statement is worth 25 points. That's a really big portion of the grade. It's important you're comfortable with your thesis statement not only in its terms of expressing your views, but also that it would meet the expectations of my class. So these questions here are some that will help you make sure you'd meet the guidelines. Your thesis should reveal what you're trying to persuade the readers of. It should include your subject and stance. It should also perhaps give support to why you view the way you view. Your thesis shouldn't be too simple. It should answer the "so what" question. That "so what" question is a reference to a PowerPoint we did earlier in the year. You could find it on Edmodo. It's called Writing an Effective Thesis Statement. Your thesis statement should be clear. You should have nouns that I know what it refers to. You should avoid ambiguous language. So words like "it" or "bad," things that don't have specific parameters, shouldn't be used. Ask yourself if you can be more specific. It's okay if your thesis seems a little wordy, because specific is better than vague, but you do want to cut as much as possible. Your thesis shouldn't assume something that the reader would know without telling them. Make sure you understand who your audience is when you're writing your thesis statement, and that you explain to them what needs to happen. If you have a term that the audience wouldn't know, perhaps you should define it at the beginning of your introduction to set the context for your thesis. Also, you don't want to use first or second person. You don't want to say I, you don't want to say you. Put it into objective third person, and it's a lot easier to avoid bias or bigotry. Last thing, make sure you didn't use any words that reveal too much emotional attachment to what you're doing. You need to be able to be objective in a sense that you avoid bias or bigotry so that you can argue with people that probably wouldn't agree with you and not turn them off from the first sentence.